This episode of Trifles is brought to you by the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946. Find them online at bakerstreetirregulars.com. Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the stone was Mazarin, the carbuncle was blue, and the mane was lion, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever stopped to wonder about what kind of chemistry experiments Sherlock Holmes was running? Or what a yeggman is? Or why Holmes's index was sorted haphazardly?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 262, Great Beginnings. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we talk about the minutiae in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, are you ready for a great beginning to 2022 and season 6?
Boy, oh boy, after the sort of years that many of us have had, yes, I am certainly ready for a great beginning.
Well, how did your year sort out? You said it was sorted.
Oh, it was just fine. It was just fine.
We had it all sorted. That's good.
Yeah, hiding under the table.
Well, perfect. Well, come out from under the table. It is 2022. This is season 6 of Trifles. We are off to a new beginning here. We will have some details for you about something, well, a number of things that we'll be doing this year. Just after these words. If you are looking for the show notes for this episode, they are available at ihose.co/trifles262. You type that all in lowercase, and that'll take you directly to the page on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com, where you can find how to support the show, how to get in touch with us, whether you want to get in touch with us via email or on social media or whatever you would like to do. You can leave us a comment right there if you want. But we would encourage you to tell other people about the show and to find ways to support us on Patreon, which is the easiest way for us. We hope to make it the easiest way for you. For as little as $1 a month, you can help keep the show going. And as I said, we will have an announcement in the middle of the show about exactly what your Patreon support membership is going to give you in 2022. So stay tuned for that. Well, as I said, this is season 6. It is the beginning of the year, and what better opportunity to talk about the canonical beginnings, the very first time when Holmes and Watson found themselves together. I was having a debate the other day on Twitter, Bert, with a follower who didn't believe that Holmes and Watson met on January 1st, 1881, as is part of the lore. And I found it I was just incredulous myself that someone could not get on board with this accepted fact that Holmes and Watson got together on January 1st. So I thought we might explore how they came together, where they came together, and a history of both that location and how we as Sherlockians got to that particular date.
Well, that's excellent. Absolutely excellent. And you can begin no place better than the canon itself. You know, we are told that this historic meeting took place in a lofty chamber, lined and littered with countless bottles. Broad, low tables were scattered about, which bristled with retorts, test tubes, and little Bunsen lamps with their blue flickering flames. And, of course, that puts us right in the midst of St. Bart's. It was founded in the 12th century and I believe is the oldest hospital in Britain that still provides medical service, occupying the site it was originally built on, although there have been an enormous number of changes, obviously.
Yeah, there certainly have. I mean, this is a historic area of London. And of course there is a lot of change that happens over the years in those circumstances. There's a great article from 1959. The Baker Street Journal has an article by none other than William S. Baring-Gould, who took a look at the London of Holmes and Watson, and he divided it into, I think, 3 sections: the Strand, Barts. Oh, excuse me. I'm going to keep going. It's more than 3 sections. The Strand, Barts, the Langham Hotel, and the Lyceum Theater. 4 different, very different buildings or areas of London. But I thought we might focus on the second one, on Barts, because here Baring-Gould does a wonderful job sharing with us the story about how St. Bartholomew's Hospital came to be. And it was a little odd for me reading it because the section began seemingly out of left field. His name was Rahere, and it is written that, quote, in spectacles, in meats, in plays, and other courtly motleys and trifles, intending, he led forth all the business of the day, end quote. Indeed, so ready was his wit and so pleasing his manner that he soon became sort of a king's jester, the king being none other than Henry I of England. And Baring-Gould goes on, he says, but Rahere, tired of a life he at length decided was both dissolute and meaningless, he determined on a pilgrimage to Rome to beg forgiveness. On the journey, he was suddenly taken ill. Soon he lay on his deathbed, and Rahere vowed that if he should by some miracle recover, he would atone for his sins by dedicating a religious foundation. And in a vision, guess who appeared to him? None other than St. Bartholomew. Well, spoiler alert, Rahere did recover. He returned to England. He persuaded the king to make him a grant of land, and there in 1123, he built a hospital and a priory, named both for the saint who saved him. And that, of course, was St. Bartholomew's Hospital, affectionately known as Barts, and the Church of St. Bartholomew, which survived today, but greatly rebuilt.
Well, it's a lovely, lovely story, and little is known, Baring-Gould tells us, of Bart's early days, except that its first master was named Alfuna, and regularly he would go out to beg for money and food for the sick under his care, and it was he who 30 years earlier had built the Church of St. Giles in Cripplegate.
You know, I have an interesting story for you about St. Giles of Cripplegate. On my first visit to London, I had to find my way down to Barts, and I happened upon St. Giles of Cripplegate, and I attended a live performance of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony in the church on that very first visit to London. It is one of my most treasured memories there.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely. It's like visiting the Church of St. Martin in the Fields. You know, when I was in London, I got to go to a couple of concerts there. That's fabulous.
I was confused, though. I when I went looking for St. Martin in the Fields, it was actually in Trafalgar Square. It was not in the Fields.
Yeah, well, the Fields didn't have a lot of longevity in that part of London.
No, they didn't. But please, I interrupted your reverie on Alfune and the early days of Barts.
Oh, no. Well, you know, it has a lovely history. The hospital had been known at one point as the House of the Poor in Farringdon, in the suburbs of the city of London, of Henry VIII's foundation. But nobody ever called it that. And that's because it was refounded by Henry VIII in December of 1546, which is, I think, passed the ownership of the hospital to the Corporation of London.
Yeah. Yeah, I like Baring-Gould's remark on that. Barts was refounded by Henry VIII, but he did little for it beyond appointing his personal surgeon, Thomas Vicary, to be its superintendent. Well, John H. Watson was, of course, the most illustrious medical name ever to serve Barts during its long and honorable career. But, of course, there were others. Baring-Gould points out Dr. Harvey, the personal physician to Charles I, who discovered the circulation of blood. Percival Pott, who, having cured himself of an unusual type of broken ankle, gave his name to the Pott's fracture. John Abernethy, the brilliant surgeon whose lectures were so well attended that the lecture hall had to be enlarged. Abernethy's brusqueness and independence were legendary. It is as well that Watson did not call him in during the adventure of the dying detective. He was adept at recognizing malingerers and treated them with withering contempt. So how do you do? So the point here that we want to stress about Barts is this is where Holmes and Watson met. Stamford and Watson met at the Criterion Bar, and Watson mentioned that he was looking for someone with whom to share lodgings, and Stamford said, "Well, you're the second person who's said that to me." And he brought him over to the laboratory at St. Bart's. And Baring-Gould points out that in 1953, Sherlockians dedicated a bronze plaque at the hospital in or near a laboratory. It was a gift of the Amateur Mendicant Society of Detroit, and it reads, "At this place, New Year's Day, 1881, were spoken the deathless words, 'You have been in Afghanistan, I perceive,' by Mr. Sherlock Holmes in greeting to John H. Watson, M.D., at their first meeting." Now, historic, no question. But why don't we take a quick break, and when we come back from the break, let's talk about just how it is that New Year's Day was pinpointed as that great beginning of Holmes and Watson. Stay tuned. Well, Bert, I think you and I have discussed this in great length in preparing for season 6. It should be no surprise to people who are with us here that when we do Trifles, we like to delve into the details of the Sherlock Holmes stories, and in some cases, we are inspired by scholarship of Sherlockians from days past. In season 4, we did a series called Mr. Sherlock Holmes the Theorist, where we specifically picked out a piece of scholarship and used it in every month. Well, we're going to be doing the same kind of thing here again this year with great regularity, and we're going to be delving into the Baker Street Journal as we have in the past. Now, you've been a subscriber of the Baker Street Journal for how long?
A very, very long time, since I was in high school.
Wow. They had high schools back then. That's great.
They did.
Back when Rahare was going to school, right?
Yeah. I used to use Lincoln's old slate, and the teachers always, gave me a hard time, and they said, "You should have been here when Lincoln was here," and he had to start out with a shovel. And I said, don't live in the past.
Well, I know there have been many shovels involved in your essays, Bert. So, but in this case, the Baker Street Journal has been around since 1946. It is still going strong, and we wanted to show our appreciation for the Baker Street Journal, which is a longtime sponsor of all things around iHose Media. They sponsored the I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere podcast for a while, and now they are sponsoring Trifles. So what we thought we would do this year is create a special offer just for our Patreon supporters. And again, for as little as $1 a month, it's not a huge commitment. And if you commit yourself for the entire year, there's a 10% discount. So if you wanted to be a $5 a month supporter and you paid all at once up front, that would cost you only $54 instead of $60. So there's a plus side for you there. But every month, what we are going to do is we're going to hold a drawing where one of our Patreon supporters gets chosen at random and receives a mystery pack of back issues of the Baker Street Journal. This is a wonderful way to experience some of that early scholarship and to get yourself familiar with what the journal has to offer. And just because we are this generous, every quarter, because the BSJ is published quarterly, we are going to hold another drawing for a free annual subscription of the BSJ. Again, only for our Patreon supporters. So the mystery pack every month, a quarterly giveaway of a free subscription to the Baker Street Journal. What could be better in 2022? If you're interested, make sure you go to our site and sign up to become a patron. And of course, check out the Baker Street Journal at bakerstreetirregulars.com. Well, Bert, we are back talking about great beginnings. The mystery of New Year's Day, this debate I was having with someone on Twitter. How is it that we find ourselves arriving at January 1st, 1881 as the beginning of the Holmes-Watson relationship?
Well, there's a certain suitability for it. We know from Watson's own records in the earliest part of A Study in Scarlet that this came at a very challenging and difficult time for Watson. He had neither kith nor kin in England, and he was limited to an income of 11 shillings and sixpence because of his army pension. Well, he says, under these sort of circumstances, I naturally gravitated to London, and I was staying at a private hotel in the Strand, but I was leading a comfortless, meaningless existence and spending the little money that I had more freely than I ought to. So alarming did the state of my finances become that I soon realized I must either leave the metropolis and rusticate somewhere in the country, or I have to make a complete alteration, a complete change, a complete upheaval in my style of living. And that sounds to many of us like the perfect time for a New Year's resolution.
Yeah, I mean, this is the time of the year, isn't it, when people are deciding to exercise, they are giving up certain habits, taking on certain activities. This is, as January implies, Janus, the two-faced god, looking forward and back. This is an opportunity for reflection and change. And Watson had done the reflection and was ready for change. So it makes great sense, just thematically, for January 1st to be selected as that date. We know, and let's deal with some dates, in fact, right now. We know that it was on 4 March that Holmes revealed what his occupation was. And let's back ourselves up to that fateful meeting. It was the Criterion. And then the meeting at St. Barts, and then the decision to enter into rooms together, which was done the next day. What we have from Watson is that he studied Holmes as the weeks went by, and it was on March 4th that Holmes indicated what his occupation was. To go back a little further, we know that the Battle of Maiwand, which is where Watson was wounded. And by the way, if anyone ever asks you where was Watson wounded, people usually say the arm or the leg. Just say the Battle of Maiwand, and that'll be it. That took place on July 7th, 1880. That's a certainty. And I'm referring to Martin Dakin's A Sherlock Holmes Commentary in this case. Great reference volume. So everyone agrees that on those particular dates. And when it comes to determining how long it was between Maiwand and that fateful meeting, we know that, after Maiwand, the British Army was besieged in Kandahar until 1 September. Blah, blah, blah. The troop ship Orontes is where Watson came over. As a result of Percy Metcalfe's research of official records, he discovered that the voyage that the ship made in October-November 1880, bringing wounded from Afghanistan, was the only occasion on which Watson could have traveled. It concludes that as the duration of typhoid is usually about 3 weeks, so Watson's months must have been taken as a weary invalid's exaggeration, he says. But by the time he arrived in London and spent his pension more freely than he ought, and combining that with the arrival of New Year's Day, I think January 1st makes a great deal of sense for when Holmes and Watson would have met. Either way, it was early in the year of 1881, and whether or not it was on that actual date or near that actual date, the fact remains that it was a great beginning for Holmes and Watson and all of us.
And that's really what matters, and it's a great way to kick the year off and also to kick off all the things you talked about in terms of the Baker Street Journal and the things that are in store for our listeners. The heart of all of this is the creativity of people like Bill Baring-Gould and others who look at the texts of Sherlock Holmes, who have a great writing skill, who've got some personal knowledge, and who can combine it all in a way that makes it entertaining and gives those of us who love this literature new ideas, and another way of looking at the stories. And that is much more than a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
Dr. John Watson, formerly medical officer attached to the Royal Berkshires, now in civilian practice.